A rifle but slammed into a young girl's back. She hit the dirt face first. A boot pressed down on her neck. Another man yanked a second girl by the hair. She screamed. He laughed. 6 girls. For men. Ropes already cut. One of the girls bit down on a wrist and got a fist for it. Blood ran from her split lip into the sand. Not one of them was older than 14 years old. Then a horse appeared on the ridge above the wash. Just one rider. He didn't move. No shouting. No warning shot. He just sat there watching with a Winchester resting easy across the saddle horn. The man's name was Caleb Wade. He had been alone for 9 years. What did one tired cowboy do in the next 4 minutes that ended 4 men's lives and changed his own forever? Stay with me on this one. Caleb Wade was a man you wouldn't notice in a town. Average height. Brown hair gone gray at the temples. A face that had been handsome once and had stopped trying. He wore a dust-colored coat and boots that had walked more miles than most men ride. He hadn't planned to be anywhere near that wash that morning. He was heading south, toward the border country, looking for work. He had a saddlebag with 3 days of food, a canteen of bad water, and $42 to his name. That was all of it. That was his whole life. 9 years before, Caleb had buried a wife and a small boy back in Texas. Fever came on a Tuesday and took them by Friday. He built the coffins himself with his own hands and his own tools. After he put them in the ground, he didn't speak to another human being for almost a month. When he finally did speak, it was to sell the farm for less than it was worth. He took the money, bought a horse, and started moving. He never stopped. Some men, when grief catches them, sit down. Others stand up and walk for the rest of their lives. Caleb was the second kind. He heard the scream from a quarter-mile off. A high, thin scream that cut through the morning air. He knew that sound. Every man who has lived rough in that country knows it. It is the sound of a woman or a girl in a kind of trouble she will not walk away from on her own. Now here's the thing. Most men, when they hear a scream like that, do one of 2 things. They ride toward it, or they ride away. There is no third option. Caleb did not stop and weigh which kind of man he was that morning. He turned the horse and rode toward the sound. The Winchester came up across his lap before he was even conscious of reaching for it. He came over the ridge slow. He didn't want to spook his own horse and announce himself. From the top he could see down into the wash where they had stopped. For men, white men, Comancheros most likely, or freelancers working the slave routes that still ran south to Mexico despite the war being over and despite the laws and despite everything. The trade in stolen girls did not end because anyone signed a paper. It ended where men with rifles made it end. And sometimes it didn't end at all. He counted the girls. 6 of them. The youngest looked maybe 7. The oldest maybe 14. All Apache by their clothes and their hair. He could see one of them had a torn dress. He could see another had blood on her mouth. The 4 men were not in a hurry. They had taken a long ride, and they had decided to stop for water and for something else. Caleb sat his horse on the ridge and watched for almost a full minute. He was not afraid. Fear had left him a long time ago. What he was doing was counting. Counting men. Counting weapons. Counting the angle of the sun and where each man stood and how long it would take him to cover the ground between the ridge and the wash if he had to. He dismounted. He tied the horse to a pinion. He took off his hat and laid it across the saddle so the brim wouldn't catch the light. He checked the Winchester. 16 rounds in the magazine. He checked the Colt on his hip. 6 in the cylinder. He had a Bowie knife on the back of his belt. He didn't check that one. He knew it was there. The Winchester had been his father's. His father had carried it through the war and then through 20 years of cattle work after. When Caleb buried his wife and son, he sold almost everything but that rifle. The rifle was the one thing he could not put a price on. Not because it had killed anything special. Because his father had handed it to him on his 16th birthday and said, "A man's rifle is the last friend that doesn't leave him." His father had been wrong about a lot of things. But not that. Caleb moved down the ridge in a low crouch. The 4 men had no idea he was within 100 miles of them. 6 girls had no idea their lives were about to change. And Caleb himself, though he didn't know it yet, was about to lose the only thing he had left, which was being alone. The first shot came from 40 yards. Caleb went prone behind a rock outcrop and sighted on the man closest to the girls, the one with the boot on the youngest girl's back. The Winchester barked once. The man dropped where he stood. He didn't fall sideways. He just folded down like his bones had quit on him. The other 3 men spun. They saw the smoke. They didn't see the shooter. One of them grabbed a rifle from where it was leaning against a saddle. The other 2 went for the pistols on their belts. Caleb worked the lever. Second shot. The man with the rifle never got it shouldered. He went down across his own gear. Now they understood the angle. They knew where the shots were coming from. Both remaining men dropped behind the bodies of their friends. One of them shouted something Caleb couldn't make out. Probably a question. Probably, how many? Probably trying to figure out if they were dealing with one man or a posse. Caleb let them wonder. He didn't fire. He moved. He came down the ridge fast and quiet, working the angle so he could come around the side and not the front. The 2 men were still hunkered down, watching the spot he'd been a minute before. By the time one of them figured out the shooter wasn't there anymore, Caleb was already at 20 yards on their flank. The 3rd man stood up to look. Caleb shot him in the chest. He fell sideways across a saddle blanket. The 4th man was smart. The 4th man knew the gig was up. He grabbed the oldest of the Apache girls by the hair and yanked her up in front of him as a shield. He had a pistol pressed under her chin. He started backing toward the horses. He was shouting now, in English, in Spanish, in whatever he thought might work. "Stop! Stop or she's dead! Stop or I blow her head off her shoulders!" Caleb stopped. He lowered the rifle slow. He held up one hand. The man kept backing up. He was sweating. His hand was shaking on the pistol. The girl was making small sounds. Not crying. Just small breathing sounds like she was trying not to be there. Caleb said, in a low, even voice, "Take it easy now. Just take it easy." The man laughed. It was a high, wrong-sounding laugh. "You take it easy. You step back 10 paces and put that rifle down, and I'll let her go when I get to my horse. You hear me? You hear me?" Caleb nodded. He took a step back. He took another. He let the rifle drop slow so it rested on its butt against his foot. He raised his hands. That was when the girl bit him. She bit him on the forearm, the one across her chest, hard enough that her teeth went through his shirt sleeve and into the meat of him. He howled. The pistol came away from her chin for half a second. The girl wrenched sideways out of his grip and dropped to the ground. Caleb already had the Colt out before his hand finished moving. The shot went through the man's throat. He went down on his knees first, then on his face like he was praying and then forgot how. It was over. The 4-minute thing was done. There was no sound except the breathing of one tall cowboy and 6 girls. Caleb stood there a minute. He was breathing hard. Not from the running. From the after. The thing that comes after, when your hands start to shake because the part of you that didn't get to be afraid finally gets its turn. He looked at the girls. They were huddled together. The oldest, the one who had bitten her captor, was on the ground where she'd fallen. Her wrists were still tied behind her. She was looking at him with a face he could not read. Not gratitude, not fear, just watching. He walked over slow, hands out where they could see them. He kept the Colt holstered. He didn't even draw the bowie until he was right there. When he pulled it out, 2 of the youngest girls flinched and ducked their faces against the older ones. He saw it and felt something in his chest go tight. "It's all right," he said. He didn't know if any of them spoke English. He kept saying it anyway. "It's all right. It's all right." He cut the oldest girl's ropes first. She didn't move. He cut the next one, and the next, one by one until all 6 wrists were free. The youngest, the 7-year-old, had bruises around hers like dark bracelets. He stepped back and gave them room. He didn't crowd them. The oldest girl finally spoke. In broken Spanish she said, Where you take us? Caleb shook his head. He didn't know enough Spanish to answer that question. He just said, Agua. You need agua. And he walked back to his horse and brought down the canteen. They drank like they hadn't had water in 2 days. Because they hadn't. It took him an hour to get them off the ground and moving. They wouldn't leave the wash without taking certain things from the dead men. The oldest girl went through pockets without flinching. She found 2 knives, some coins, a small leather pouch with something sacred in it that one of the men had taken from her. She took it back. She didn't look at the body when she did it. By sundown, Caleb had them 3 miles east of the wash, in a cottonwood grove near a spring he knew. He built a fire. He cooked salt pork and bread. The girls ate. He ate too. Nobody said anything. When the youngest girl was done, she crawled over to her older sister and fell asleep with her head in the older girl's lap. Then the next youngest did the same. One by one they slept in a pile like puppies. The oldest stayed awake, watching Caleb across the fire. He nodded at her. She didn't nod back. But she didn't look away either. He sat there a long time. He let the fire burn down. He thought about which way he would take them in the morning. There had to be an Apache band somewhere within a few days' ride that would know them. He'd figure it out. The worst, he told himself, was over. The worst was not over. The hoofbeats came before sunrise. Caleb heard them while it was still gray. 10, maybe 12 horses moving in formation. Not Apache. Not raiders. Cavalry. He sat up. The girls were still asleep. He didn't wake them. By the time he had his boots on, the patrol was in the grove. 12 troopers. A lieutenant at the front. The lieutenant's face was sunburned and tired and not happy to see what he was seeing. 1 white man. A banked fire. 6 Apache children sleeping in a pile. The lieutenant didn't dismount. Step away from the children. Hands where I can see them. Caleb stood up slow. He raised his hands. State your name. Caleb Wade. State your business. There are 4 men dead in a wash about 3 miles west. I shot them. They had these girls roped on the ground. I cut them loose. The lieutenant looked at him for a long second. Then he looked at his sergeant. The sergeant signaled to 2 of the troopers, and the troopers swung down and walked over and disarmed Caleb. They took the Winchester. They took the Colt. They took the Bowie. They left him standing there with empty hands. You shot 4 men. Yes. 4 white men. Yes. 4 Apache girls. Yes. The lieutenant tilted his head. You understand how that's going to sound in a courthouse. Caleb didn't answer. He understood. He'd understood the minute he'd pulled the trigger the first time. That was when the oldest girl woke up. She woke up the way a deer wakes up. Instantly, completely, no transition. She sat upright and saw the cavalry, and her hand went automatically for one of the knives she'd taken from the dead men, which she had slept on top of. Caleb saw the movement and said, Sharp. No, they're soldiers. They won't hurt you. She froze. The lieutenant saw the knife. The lieutenant said, in halting Apache, 2 words. Caleb didn't know what they meant. Whatever they were. The girl's shoulders dropped half an inch. She didn't put the knife down. She didn't take her hand off it either. She looked at the lieutenant. She looked at Caleb. And then, in the broken English she had hidden the day before, she said, This man, he kill the bad men. He give us water. He give us food. He no hurt us. The lieutenant looked at her. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the sleeping girls. He took off his hat and rubbed his face like a man who had been on the trail for too many days. If you're with me this far, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button. What this old cowboy did next surprised even me when I first heard it. Now back to the story. Mr. Wade, said the lieutenant, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt this morning, because if I don't, I have to put you in irons and bring you to Tucson, and we're going to have a hanging that I don't actually want." Caleb said nothing. "But these girls are now my problem. And by extension, your problem. Because I'm taking them to the agency in Sentinel, and the agency will decide what's done with them. Are you understanding me?" "Yes. You're coming with us. Until I'm satisfied your story holds up, you stay with the patrol." He brought them in to Sentinel 2 days later. Sentinel was a dirt town with a saloon, a mercantile, a livery, and a small federal building with one fat man in it called the Indian Agent. His name was Hollis Birch. Caleb did not like him on sight. Birch looked the girls over the way a man looks over cattle. "Where are they from?" "Don't know," said the lieutenant. "They had mescalero blankets. But the band that wore mescalero blankets in this country was wiped out 2 months ago. There's nobody to send them back to." Birch nodded as if this confirmed something. "Mission school," he said. "St. Bartholomew. They have an opening for 6. The oldest girl, Naya." Caleb had finally learned her name on the trail. She went very still. Caleb had heard about St. Bartholomew. Everyone on the territory had. It was a mission school for Apache children. They cut their hair. They beat them if they spoke their language. They worked them in fields. The winter before, 11 children had died of pneumonia in 1 month. 11 out of 40. "What's the other option?" said Caleb. Birch looked at him. "There is no other option. They're wards of the federal government now. Unless someone takes responsibility for them." Birch laughed. He actually laughed. You're going to take 6 Apache girls? On what? Where? You don't have a homestead listed in this territory." "I have a place," said Caleb. "In Cottonwood Valley. I inherited it 3 years back. It's listed in the county book. You can look it up." Birch's smile got smaller. "And," said Caleb, "I was a deputy in Lincoln County for 2 years. I can read law. I know about wardship and adoption under the Indian Office Regulations of 1872. The smile was gone. Caleb walked out of the agent's office. He walked across the dirt street. He stood under the awning of the mercantile. He didn't know what he was about to do. Or rather, he did know. He had known since he cut the first rope. But standing there in front of the law and the army and a fat agent in a dirty office, he understood for the first time that saving those 6 girls in the wash had been the easy part. Keeping them alive was about to be the hard part. And he had nothing. No wife. No name in this town. No money beyond $42. No idea how to raise a child, much less 6 of them. He took a breath. He walked back across the street. He opened the door to the agent's office. He said, "Get out the papers." Birch took 2 hours to find the right papers. He took longer than he had to. He was hoping Caleb would lose his nerve. Caleb didn't. The lieutenant stayed. He stood by the window the whole time, arms folded, watching. Caleb didn't know what side the lieutenant was on. He didn't ask. The papers were called Application for Indian Wardship under Section 12. There were 8 pages. Half of them were affidavits about means and character. Caleb filled them out in pencil at the agent's desk. Birch read them as Caleb wrote. He found a problem on the 3rd page. You list 6 children. You list no wife. You list no female relative who would reside in the household. That's right. Section 12 requires a female member of the household for the upbringing of female wards. The lieutenant spoke for the first time. "Hollis, I served 2 years in Washington. There is no such requirement in Section 12. Birch's face went a shade redder. "Furthermore," said the lieutenant, "if you obstruct this application, I will write a report. About this morning. About 4 dead Comancheros in a wash. About 6 girls who were about to be sold across the border. About a federal agent who would rather send those girls to a school that's killing children than turn them over to a man who killed 4 armed slavers to save them. You want to know how that report reads in Washington?" "Hollis." Birch finished signing the papers. He signed them with a small flourish. He looked at Caleb. He said, "They'll be back here within a year. They'll run. Or they'll die out there. And I'll be waiting." Caleb folded the papers. He put them in the inside pocket of his coat. "Maybe," he said, "but not today." He walked out of that office with 6 girls behind him in a line. The youngest, the 7-year-old whose name he had finally learned was Lila, was holding onto the back of his coat with one fist and would not let go. The town watched them go. A man on the porch of the saloon spat in the street as they passed. A woman in front of the mercantile pulled her child inside. 2 cowboys outside the livery just stared. Caleb didn't look at any of them. But one old woman on the porch of the laundry came down the steps with a cloth bundle in her hands. She walked right up to Naya, who was carrying one of the middle girls on her hip, and she pressed the bundle into Naya's free hand. She said, "Bread. For the road." Her voice was rough. Naya looked at her. Naya didn't have the English yet to say thank you. She just nodded once. The old woman looked at Caleb. She said, "I had 3 of my own. They're all gone." She turned around and walked back up the steps of the laundry and went inside and shut the door behind her. Caleb stood there a second. Then he kept walking. They left Sentinel that afternoon. He had bought a small wagon at the livery, bargained hard, paid almost all of his $42 for it, and an old mule to pull it. He put the smallest girls in the wagon. The older 2 rode behind him on his horse, taking turns. The trip to Cottonwood Valley was 4 days. It was the strangest 4 days of his life. He didn't know how to talk to them. They didn't know how to talk to him. He learned that the youngest, Lila, was attached to him in a way that didn't need words. She rode in the wagon and she watched him constantly. When he stopped to water the mule, she got down to help him without being asked. When he made camp, she gathered sticks for the fire before he had to ask her to. The oldest, Naya, watched him in a different way. The way a person watches a thing that might still betray them. On the second night, around the fire, the 3rd oldest, a girl named Tama, around 11, got hold of his canteen and a knife and went off by herself for an hour. He didn't follow her. When she came back, she had 3 rabbits. She had made a snare. She had skinned and gutted them. She handed him the meat without a word. He cooked the rabbits. They ate. Tama, for the first time in 3 days, sat slightly closer to the fire than the others. On the 4th day they came over a low rise and Cottonwood Valley opened up below them. It was a long green valley with a creek through the middle and a small log house at one end. The house was half falling down. The roof was sagging. There was no glass in the windows. The corral had no fence. He turned in the saddle. He looked at the 6 girls behind him. "It's not much," he said. He didn't know if any of them would understand. "But it's ours." Naya, sitting behind him on the horse, said in her broken English, "It is good." They rode down into the valley together. The first month was rough. He fixed the roof. The 2 oldest girls helped him. The middle ones cleaned out the house and made it livable. Lila followed him everywhere and held his hand when she was tired. He didn't know what to do with that. Nobody had held his hand in 9 years. He let her. The second month, Tama brought home an antelope. They smoked the meat for winter. He started teaching them English at night by the fire. Naya started teaching him Apache words during the day. He was a slow learner. They laughed at him. The first time he heard Naya laugh, he had to look away for a second because his eyes had gone wet without his permission. The 3rd month, 2 riders came up the valley. He met them with the Winchester. They were neighbors from 2 ranches over. They had heard about him, about the 6 Apache girls. They had ridden up to see if it was true. It was true. They had brought a milk goat as a gift. They said, "Children need milk." Years went by. This is the part where time moves differently. You can tell it in a few sentences or you can tell it in 100. Either way, what happens is the same. Children grow. Naya grew tallest first. She turned 16 the second year and 17 the third, and by then she could read English from books Caleb bought in town when he could afford them. She helped him keep the books for the ranch. They were never rich. They were never quite poor either. Tama became the hunter. By the time she was 15, she could bring down a deer at 200 yards. The Winchester became hers more than Caleb's. He gave it to her on her 16th birthday. He said, "A man's rifle is the last friend that doesn't leave him." I figure that's true for women too. Tama held the rifle in her hands and didn't say anything. But that night she cleaned it twice. The middle girls, 3 of them, grew into their own people. One of them, a quiet one named Sela, turned out to have a mind for numbers. Caleb saved for 2 years and sent her to the school in Tucson. She came back a teacher. She started a one-room school in Cottonwood Valley. She taught white children and Apache children and Mexican children all in the same room. And when a man rode out from Tucson to complain about the mixing, she met him on the porch with a stack of state regulations and read them to him until he got back on his horse. Lila stayed. Lila, the youngest, the 7-year-old who had held the back of his coat in front of the agent's office. She grew up and she did not leave. She married a young man from the next valley over when she was 22. A good man. Quiet man. A man who already knew that to marry Lila was to live within reach of Caleb Wade for the rest of his life. He was fine with it. He moved into the ranch. He worked the cattle with her. They had 3 children. Caleb taught those children to ride. Naya married too. A schoolteacher from Phoenix who came west looking for work and found her instead. They moved to a small house an hour's ride away. She brought her children to the ranch every Sunday. Hollis Birch was wrong. They didn't run. They didn't die. None of them. The land got better. The herd grew. The fence got built. The roof never sagged again. Caleb got old. It happened slowly and then all at once, the way it always does. His hair went all the way white. His shoulders stooped. The hand he held the reins with started to shake a little in the mornings. He still rode. He just rode shorter distances. He built a porch swing in the 11th year. It was a wide one, wide enough for 3 or 4 people. It hung from chains on the long side of the house. He used to sit on it in the evenings with whichever girl was around. By the time he was old, all 6 of them came back at least twice a year, with their husbands and their children, and the porch was never empty. One spring evening, when he was 62 years old, Caleb was sitting on that swing alone. The sun was going down. The valley was green. Somewhere in the house Lila was cooking, and one of her children was laughing about something. From up the road came the sound of a wagon. Naya, coming for Sunday supper. From the corral came the sound of Tama's husband working a horse. Caleb closed his eyes. He tried to remember what his life had been like before. Before the wash. Before the 4 men. Before the 6 girls in a pile by his fire. He couldn't do it. He could remember the facts. He could remember the farm in Texas. He could remember the names of his first wife and his first son. He could remember the grief that had walked him out of Texas and the 9 silent years on horseback. He could remember all of it as a story, but he could not put himself back inside it. He couldn't find the man who had ridden alone. That man was gone. He had ridden into a wash one morning and never come back out. He opened his eyes. Lila was standing on the porch with a cup of coffee. She was watching him. "You all right, Daddy?" She had called him that since she was 9. He had not asked her to. She had just started one day. "I'm all right, sweetheart." She set the coffee down on the rail beside him. She kissed the top of his white head. She went back inside. Caleb sat on the swing. Somewhere in a wash 30 years before, 4 men had taken 6 girls who had nothing. And 6 girls had taken back a man who thought he had nothing left to lose, and proved he had been wrong about all of it. The Winchester hung on the wall inside. He had not carried it on his saddle in a long time. He didn't need to. He sat on the porch a while longer. The wagon came up the road. Naya climbed down with her oldest boy. The boy ran for the porch the way only a boy with somewhere safe to run can run. Caleb stood up to meet him. He was not alone. He had not been alone in a long time. He was not going to be alone again.